Welcome to Effective Education. My name is Joseph. I help people with web media, whether that's writing, editing, producing, and recording. But the star of the show is Pavel whose lifetime experience as a CTO and world-class ability to self-teach has made him the go-to expert for junior developers transitioning to senior developers. And that's just one thing. There is like I said, a lifetime worth of experience that we're going to be sharing on this program. So Pavel, thank you to you for putting this together. Ready to get started?
Hello, Joseph. Hello, everyone. Yes, let's get started.
So I know that self-learning is it fair to say an obsession of yours? It's something that you're obviously very passionate about. And it's a passion that I share in because a lot of what got me to where I am today is because of self-learning. So let's start our conversation today by asking you, Pavel, do you think you could select what is the first thing people need to understand about self-learning in order to begin this journey?
Yeah, nice start. Let's try to figure out something the most important because often it will make us resonate about lots of things to do, to change, to connect. But let's say the most important part is to accept that it is possible, is to see that other people do that, is to get impressed of how fast some people could learn. Sometimes the stories feel like they're made up, but that's the reality. And that's a basic start, maybe not to learn the stories of the others, but to believe that some intuitive uh, constraints about the education that we might have from the school, having that experience of really complex learning in some classes, that it shouldn't be like that, that it should be easier. But the less obvious part is to how to make your personal learning track that easy. So the most important part is to believe it is possible. And I think that part could be the most difficult to do actually. If you have some belief that stems from your experience, and most of us and our the school with that kind of experience, that learning is difficult and boring, and to challenge your belief. Do you agree that challenging your beliefs is the most difficult thing maybe in our lives?
I think people are lucky if they can come out of school and all they can say about it is it was boring. I think for a lot of people look back on school, and I do. I look back on school as a mixture of some good experiences and some bad experiences, and it actually created a divide between their structured learning system and the self-learning that I did when I went home and taught myself how to build things as well.
I've discovered self-education in school by occasion, and some of us really had a lifetime influence by certain teachers because those teachers were God inspired. But we are here to share that thing, that very experience that we had there with other people who want to change their attitude, to change what they get in their profession today as they're already adults.
Let's just say in order for me to believe it's possible, I would have to accomplish it. Like, for instance, if I wanted to believe that I could swim, I need to actually accomplish swimming. So, do you recall maybe someone who inspired you to believe in this, or were you your first source of inspiration?
That was accidental. In my case, self-learning came naturally. The revelation when I switched to experimentation, and just like you mentioned, if you want to learn how to swim, you will um, build your confidence after it worked for you for the first time. Actually, we start by seeing how others swim, but that's not always possible because if you live in a poor village, you could see that everyone around you is not uh, getting a really good education. And this is not true that you cannot get the cool education as well if you have access to the internet. So you do not have a really nice example around you, but you have an example in principle. But of course, your personal experience is the next major step. And this means that we should structure the way how we teach the others is to let them create something very basic but real from the very first steps. I remember this experience from the computer science classes in my childhood. First, it was extracurricular when I got access to the computer for the first time in my life. It was back in the 90s. My family wasn't rich, so we had no PC at home. And it was exciting when you first run a program on a computer and when you touch the keyboard. Then it was in school when you run your first program that does something, it was also exciting. And so the good learning process should be structured that way. I'm not expert in teaching how to swim, but very likely it would mean to swim with some support by probably doing the right movements. Not sure, actually, honestly, because swimming and riding a bicycle is the activities when you fail at first, and that's okay. That's how the process happens to every of us. But it's different in programming because programming is complex, and this automatically means the good teacher could always pick a small tiny bit that is really easy to do for everyone.
Mhm. I think I have a really good question here, just in comparing activities like swimming and cycling, is that both of these activities require additional support of people, especially with swimming, because getting it wrong can be pretty bad for you. But you obviously need pools, and in cycling you need to be on a cycle, and it augments our what we do naturally in a technically an artificial way, but it's still pretty close to the natural sensation of movement in both of these cases. So what part of programming and coding do you feel is an extension of what you are doing naturally?
That's an unexpected way to see on the problem to me. And the question could read in two ways. What is natural for me personally? And if I will talk about that too much, we will end up discussing my natural strong sides. But I'm more set up to talk about the things in general for people who maybe do not feel talented, to encourage them and to share the actionable advice with them on what to focus. In this case, the programming might feel devastating at first sight because many people see it as magic. And if you do not have the really good guide into it, it really could be so. You could, if you have a computer, everyone have a computer, you already have a tool to start programming. In my course, people start their first experiments in Chrome, in the same Chrome most of you are using to browse the web. You don't need any special software to start. But that's not obvious. You cannot start simply by that. So you will start by searching for the answer. How to start a program, what to do first, and what you will do, and the easiness how you will do that depends on the quality of the advice that you will find that way. The quality of an article, of a book, of a manual. And if you start with a very complex explanation of a very simple things, you could never get that feeling of what's come natural. And if
Mhm.
you get a good explanation of the same thing, you could quickly start feeling that programming is something natural because it is created by other people, and it feels that I understand how those people think when they created this. And so I can predict how this or that part will act if I do this. And often I get this pleasant feeling that I expect that something new will work in a certain way, and it actually does that way. It was a really contenting feeling when I started learning the computer by experimentation. Of course, first it started with some extracurricular lessons, then it was a book, but at some point you start trying things that were not in the books you read. And you try it and you do some predictions that if I download and install file and execute it, then I'll be able to read the guidance and there will be the next button. And you do that and you see it happens exactly like that. And when you clicked all the next buttons, you get that software available for you to use. That wasn't described in the books, but you did it. And when you did it for the first time, it get that feeling that it works and you just learn something new. Maybe more people actually did that than noticed that they've learned something new, and that's very important. For example, my wife could believe she's not an expert in configuring Google Suite, or how do they call it? Google Drive is a part of it. But in fact, she did for her company such a sophisticated configuration of Google Drive. So everyone was happy because they were able to find the documents places. So people often do that experimenting and discoveries without really noticing that they learn, that they doing their self-education by experimenting.
I think the opportunities to experiment now are immense compared to the opportunities to experiment prior to the early 2000s, prior to the 90s. I think prior to when you started, what you could experiment on then compared to what you could just play around with now is totally different. So we want to start talking about trajectory. So we're going to get to that. But I think one thing that I'd like to know now is, what sort of experiments would you try to do if you were trying to feel your way around the programming landscape today compared to what you were doing back then?
Today, I started my hobby of learning natural languages in order uh, to try to learn something new from scratch and to understand how do actually we learn. So today, when I learn programming languages or new technologies, it always feels different than if the other people do the same, because my experience from other technologies is transferable. So I recommend to other people to learn to become a web developer different things than I practice myself, because my practice is based on a very different experience. Okay? I'm not doing that from scratch. So if I would starting today, I wouldn't know how to start if I will be starting with no experience. So you still need some proper guidance, and that's why we are taking these recordings and why do I create content. So it is more correct to say what do I recommend for those to start, what kind of experience. And in if we ask it like that, the answer is simple. Start with the code of other people. What does it mean in practice? In my course, I show how to, for example, to learn HTML. That's the beginning of a front-end developer profession. You could open an existing web page. Some web pages on the internet are high quality, in particular if you open the documentation of a framework that is designed to be used exactly in front end, then its documentation is an example of a good high quality HTML itself. So if you open that HTML, then Chrome allows you to edit things there and get the immediate feedback, how it works. You change the tag name and you immediately see the change of its look on the web page. And the same, I recommend to start with courses with immediate feedback or to start learning languages. For example, if you want, not for example, in general, you start by searching the language name, for example, JavaScript, learn interactively. Interactively is a magic word. And you will find for virtually every programming language existing, a website that contains tiny bite-sized lesson where you read what you should do. You get a brief guidance how to actually do that. You type a really tiny code and that code executes immediately and you get a feedback, either an error or the result. And if you change the code, when you get the successful result, you could still execute that code. You could change something and see the difference. And that's the experimentation, how you start, and that's the core of the approach that I recommend to everyone. And that's how I structure acquiring the hard skills today.
It reminds me of, say, like if learning to cook, you're following somebody else's recipe. You're not building a recipe from scratch. If you're learning how to play music, you're playing somebody else's music first. You might change a few notes, you might change a few steps in the cooking process, but you are largely working with other people's creations first before trying to set out on your own. So that's sort of how I've been processing what you're saying.
And I'm curious that it could be different for programming, because that's all true for cooking and other things you said. And the same for learning languages. You should repeat the phrases. That's the best start. You should probably memorize text to build your initial vocabulary and patterns. That also could be the faster way to start to gain the ability to say something, to build at least some basic, but not very that basic as if you would study grammar, but some basic natural phrases in a new language. But in software development, we have a decent share of synthetic solutions, synthetic inventions, synthetic languages, and everything synthetic is much simpler than natural. That's the difference. So if you have some synthetic things, then you do not always should follow the steps of others. You, like in that interactive course. In the interactive course, you do not follow the samples. You get this very simple guidance, but because the domain for that simple guidance is so simple, you could immediately create your own product because everything is obvious. That's not the case in many natural areas. It was like if the cooking process was structured like you should put 5 grams of salt here. Yes, you could figure out on your own if you have cooking weights how to get 5 grams of salt, but no one teaches to cook like that, right? We teach in longer sequences. But in programming, you get some interesting immediate feedback. Yes, and here's the thing, you cannot get the immediate feedback. If you put those 5 grams of salt to the water, that's done successfully, but you don't feel that it works somehow. It will work in the whole dish. It doesn't work on its own. And that's the difference with programming, because you get some tiny, merely useful, but often unexpected outcome immediately. And that's the difference. But it is also true, the same approach where you go by analogy in programming, because we also have really complex and naturally involved things there. So to solve really complex tasks, the best way is to see how other people solve those tasks and then draw conclusions. So learning programming adds new ways of learning, but also relies on the old ways.
And I've been really looking forward to asking you about learning, because as general as a subject as it is, I would love to hear your perspective on this. But how do I even, like, how does a person even know or can tell that we're learning when much of what we think is learning is either repetition or memorization, or we're confusing techniques that we're using for learning as the actual process of learning? So like, here, let me put it as simply as possible and see where you go with it. What even is learning?
I have a structured answer on this, maybe because I got this answer by once on over the internet, and I wasn't able to find where I get it, but let me try to reproduce it. And there are several levels of understanding of uh, uh, the several levels how we can say that you actually learn or understand something. So the very basic level that you spend some time, or better say some attention for learning. So that's a very different between you're just dreaming of something, or you're actually trying to do something. Even if you fail, that's a very big difference. And please consider this level, because all your self-gratification should be focused on that you are trying, not on the actual outcomes, because that's the most under your control. So the next level is that you're able to reproduce some ideas. That's exactly memorizing. If you remember something and you're able to reproduce some ideas. And the next level would be, wait, the first level is that you think that you could reproduce some ideas because you've read them and you have that feeling that you understand, right? Let's let's explore the difference between this feeling that I understand and your ability to reproduce the information, to verbalize. If you never try to verbalize, you could get that natural impression that feeling that you understand is the same as you really understand, but it is not the same. I suppose even our different parts of our brain are responsible for that feeling. It is all right. You're all right. You understand everything. And the actual processing of information and your understanding in the processing of information, not in that estimation. Estimation could lie to you. And when you try to reproduce that information, even by writing what you remember, you could already found gaps in your understanding. You could find where things do not add up, while before you started writing, you thought that everything is clear, that you understand everything. That's the next level. Then the next level is to get the resistance from other people. So if you try to teach someone, for example, teach someone or to argue with someone on this topic, you could find more gaps than when you were writing. And the final level, this is practice. This level is mostly important in technical things when you could build something and see if it works or if it doesn't work. But this level exists, but it might be more complex to actually try in non-technical parts, in social sciences and social activities, because the feedback could be long. And even in techniques, we have such a long feedback loops. For example, a good architecture, that's a hot topic for the experienced developers, but you cannot do the immediate feedback on your architecture other than by using the previous level by asking others to check your code. Because both bad code and good code would work and solve the problem. The difference is the costs and the costs of changing this code. And these costs are in the future. You cannot check them immediately. So we've got these levels, and this is a very important topic, fascinating. I'll try to find more on it and share more in the future.
Well, if there's any takeaway from it that I found the most fascinating is even in a completely solo pursuit of self-learning, it's still reliant on others in order to improve that process. Because as you say, there's that step where you have to have the resistance of other people. And fundamentally, learning is obviously we want to do it for our own sake, but the things that we learn are always to be of better help to others and to be a better participant in our culture and in our society. So sooner or later, it's going to encounter other people. And I think that's a really cool part of this too, is that this isn't just like you're alone in an office learning everything. You're going to be interacting with other people regardless.
Internet has changed, internet and the computer techniques has changed these things. I believe most of the human history it was like that, but maybe even if in the past, you probably have a picture of a blacksmith as someone who lives outside of the village, who is doing some craft that no one thinks is magic, but that is something close to magic or witchcraft. And with internet, you could skip the stage of the resistance of the others if you learn to code, or if you learn. Some people do even search engine optimization without actually directly interacting with people. This activity is targeted to other people, but there are many introverts or maybe even sociopaths in that area who do this webmasters work, just operating with people as with black boxes with their reactions. So internet brought us new possibilities, but of course, if you want to progress faster, and in most areas you will create things for other people, of course you better add other people to your process. This will help you a lot. But if you have psychological issues with that, please remember that it is still possible to continue. Maybe you should better work with your issues, but that shouldn't be a blocker for sure.
Is there a ideal or even a perfect trajectory for someone who's starting from scratch and wants to become a front-end developer?
The perfect trajectory is the thing that you should be chasing for, and this thing do not exist in the form like one size fits all. This is the most important thing to think about when you start. And in fact, I want to teach people to become their own methodists. Of course, the perfect product would be that you join some school and you're assigned with a tutor. And this tutor assigns you the perfect tasks that let you progress faster, the faster based on your unique situation. But unfortunately, I see many people try to build something like that, and the AI is a new promise in that area, but it still doesn't work like that. So the perfect trajectory that I practice, and especially in language learning, the area that I have chosen for me as a model of education because it is difficult for me, is that you learn different ways to study things. For example, in learning languages, you have lots of materials to do. You could use Duolingo, you could learn grammar, you could consume content, you could try to speak, etc., etc. You should know all those possibilities, but you shouldn't try to practice them all at once. You should try the elements of those. You should feel how it goes, and that's the important part. You should feel how it works for you. You should feel the results. That's the problem where other tutors could, the external tutors could fail, because no organization has invented such degree of flexibility in their course. And this way you build your own trajectory. So from the perfect school should provide you the really rich environment of very different ways to learn things. But that's not all. Of course, when you come to a school, you have no experience, no understanding how to be your own tutor, apparently. So the perfect school should also provide you with a typical roadmap, and you should follow that roadmap. But what I want to teach everyone, that you shouldn't try on a particular roadmap. You shouldn't write non-fictional books sequentially as they're written. It is normal to read non-fictional books at the place that is the most interesting for you, because that's how learning works. You are not ready to get every type of knowledge, but in the same time, you have some background experience, your common sense, your life experience that makes some things more obvious for you than for others. And if you will spend the same time for those things, you will lose your motivation on something useless, and you will spend less time exercising on something that is really difficult for you. And then back to the perfect school, when we gave these things to the student, we should track how fast the student progresses. So if we see the fast progress in some area, we could nudge the student to try something different instead of that, because different methods. We as a school and you as a self-learner should balance things. Things that are easy for you and that you like, that are enjoyable. They shouldn't be boring, and some things, yes, are easy and enjoyable. And these things could be surprising. And you should combine things that are the most difficult for you, but also not trying to make them perfect, just approaching and approaching then again, and leaving them unsuccessful, and that's okay. The surprising thing that could be enjoyable in my practice was flashcards repetition. People often do not like flashcards, and today I do not like flashcards repetition, but sometimes in the past it was really addictive, like scrolling the Instagram. What works for you good today wouldn't work for you good tomorrow, and vice versa. But that was the first part. So the main point is that you should be your own tutor. You should learn to be your own tutor. You should learn how self-learning works. So self-learning is a separate subject itself that you should learn alone with your profession. And here we come to a broader context. What is learning how to learn? It falls into such categories that I call meta skills. You probably heard of hard skills. Hard skills is the exact knowledge of how to do your work, how to write code, how to draw design, how to write text, etc. And there are soft skills. Soft skills is the skills on how you interact with other people. But there is a third category that do not have a common name, so I picked one of the names that circulate, meta skills. The skills that are not hard, not technical, and not related to communicating with other people directly. And this category is vast. I have a really long list of those skills. It is a skill how to learn. It is a skill how to use Google properly. And that's another skill. You could do it better or less successful. How to use AI nowadays. How to manage your workday, manage your energy, and so on, so on. Psychology, personal psychology falls into this category because most of us, maybe everyone, is familiar with the problem of procrastination when you don't do what's the most important. And apparently, if you have such a problem that interfere with your work, you should also learn how to deal with that problem, not only how to write the code. Because if you don't write the code, what's the purpose? And yes, that's a vast category, and you should do that. That's another block. So first was that you should be your own tutor, should become. Second, you should realize that you also learn different categories of skills: hard skills, soft skills, and meta skills. And the third thing, talking about the perfect trajectory, that's a very important thing. So we should return to this idea again and again, is that you should progress in spiral. What does it mean? I already mentioned that you shouldn't read nonfiction sequentially. You should read the most interesting parts and realize, can you understand this, or should you return to the same book in the beginning because it operates with some concepts you're missing. And the same, you will find some very difficult things that will need to change how you think about many things. The things could be surprising. My first experience related to this was in the middle of my school years, when even before I started programming things, it was related to electronics. I've got a really nice book that explained what a type of device called decoder means. It was really easy to understand by example. And then in a magazine, I found a device that is called coder. Intuitively, it is obvious that it should do the opposite operation, but somehow I struggle to understand how exactly does it work. What is the opposite? So I had no idea, and that article didn't help me at all. But when I returned to the same article in a few months, everything was obvious. And that's the wisdom. There will be lots of things like that. Lots of things that you're unable to understand from the first approach. And you shouldn't force yourself into understanding things from the first approach, because some of them are very, very complex and need you to change the way you see the world. There are lots of examples in learning languages, because the way how a noun and the verb goes in different languages could be very different. So you cannot simply translate it word by word from your mother tongue, but you either cannot use the new patterns intuitively, because you need some training and you need some time to absorb them. You shouldn't learn the things, you try to learn the things at once, but there are so many things. So how you should learn these complex things, if you cannot do it in one approach, but you should progress somehow. Maybe you don't need those, maybe you should continue with something else. And that's, you should learn the trick that we could metaphorically call a spiral, learning spiral, when you learn what you could learn easily in one block, because I have no special remarks about that. And if you occasionally encounter a really tough topic, this topic could be obvious and easy for your peers, but somehow it is really difficult for you, your brains just do not produce this kind of information, that's all right. You should just study what you can in that topic and postpone it for some time and switch to another topic. And if you find another topic of that kind, you should do exactly the same. Learn the basics, read the theory, realize that you don't understand how to use it, and postpone. And you should accept this approach, realize that it is normal, but you should also schedule when you return to this topic. And you should return over time, do exactly the same. If it became obvious to that point because your brain has connected the dots, you just finish with that topic. And otherwise, you again postpone it. And we have lots of really difficult things to learn. Fortunately, they are not important to start your career. But it is also really important to start with the things, for example, in the area that is difficult for me, if you start learning a new language, then I highly recommend people to learn the correct pronunciation in the very beginning. And you won't be able to pronounce things correctly from the beginning again. But if you postpone this, it is getting more and more difficult. So you should train the correct pronunciation, then continue learning language, failing with your pronunciation, that happens, and then return to setting better and better pronunciation again and again. This will simplify learning words for you. This will simplify training the correct pronunciation in the end. That's a correct strategy. And the same with some complex topics in programming, like probably creating diagrams. I know that this is something obvious for some students, and this is something really difficult to do for others because they just do not understand what to include in these diagrams, what's important and what's not. So it is much better if you start trying that earlier, but then you do not force you into doing those diagrams for every of your tasks, because you will lose all the motivation for your progress. You force yourself to do the first diagram and maybe a couple, maybe just one, and you postpone this. And then time to time, you do it again and again and again, and your brain at one point will switch, and this topic will become obvious to you. We could wrap up what I've just said, but I was mostly focused on three things. Let me wrap up. So the first one, that you become your own self-learning tutor. And that's the example of meta skills. And that meta skills is the second thing I want to communicate, is that you should consider several categories of what you learn: hard skills, soft skills, and meta skills. And the third thing is is learning in the way your brain works. We could call it spiral learning.
If there's anything that I appreciate about the idea of meta skills, and I'm learning about this for the first time talking to you, is that there are a lot of things that people can do, especially growing up using the internet, things that people can do intuitively that we don't think of as skills. It's just something that we just do and we don't really give ourselves that kind of credit. But it is a really important confidence builder to understand that these are things that we are doing skillfully, and it's just a matter of maybe talking to somebody who doesn't know how to do them before you realize, oh yes, I can search things exceptionally well, or I can write posts exceptionally well, or I do know how to navigate social media exceptionally well. So these are all things that can help build out your, not just your personality, but your profile and your confidence too.
Brushing your teeth is not a skill that you might connect to your profession. But if one day scientists discover that if you brush your teeth specifically, improves your mental capacity, after this moment, you will learn and train this exact skill in connection to your work. And the same, searching things over the internet could be intuitive, and that's all right. You shouldn't train this until the moment you know why you should train to do this better.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I did read a few years ago that not brushing your teeth is linked to heart disease. So don't wait for any more incentives to brush. Just brush the teeth.
Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe you can talk about this personally, or maybe this is just something that you've seen, but what would be some early mistakes that could lead to bad habits, bad learning habits, even bad working habits?
I do not have some list of those mistakes structured because the mistakes could be diverse and they are
Hmm.
mostly inspired by the sources that we use. So the main mistake is to expect, oh, this mistake is really bold. I saw so many people, so who expect that someone will teach them. Let's talk about this mistake because it is the boldest one. This starts in academia. So that's the habit we acquire in the school and maybe sometimes in the family, that there should be one teacher who knows what to do, who knows what you should learn, and who should tell you exactly what to do. Unfortunately, this no longer works because it could work when you learn something useless, as some of the disciplines in our schools. Uh, it could also work in university, even when you're learning something useful for you, but the quality is much lower than if you would be learning otherwise. The productivity on learning in the university is much lower than you could do the same at home. Not everything that is available in university is available to learn out of it, but there is a wide discussion that our education method is in crisis. So we should change how we teach, even in universities. The worst thing that these expectations that someone should teach you could end up with, that when you come to a new organization, you will expect that senior developers will teach you as a junior developer. And this
Hmm.
process will be that passive, that they decide, they communicate to you, and because of that, you progress. This is a big failure, and unfortunately, I saw people strongly believe in that, and I failed to change the beliefs of some of them.
Hmm.
And I eventually I saw the gaps, the times gap in salaries of these people, and people doing the same work, living in the same region, but working in different companies in different positions. The same work, I mean, working in the same profession, but apparently at a different qualification level. So this is a big breaker of your progress. You should be the source of inspiration, the source of your learning process. The sources of knowledge, say other people, experience, developers, books, AI, Google, should serve your requests. They shouldn't inspire the request, because otherwise you won't be progressing. That's the boldest mistakes, and I think other mistakes are rather minor in comparison to this passive or versus proactive mindset.
Coming to rely on others to always act as teachers, as because you mentioned that it's partly our institutions, but it's also partly our family structure. So it's something that can influence people from an exceptionally early age. If our parents are our first teachers and we become reliant on them to, it's not just a discussion about education, it is a discussion about parenting as well, and the ability for parents to sometimes relinquish control and allow the child in those developing years to try to apply themselves first before always turning to your parents as your first guides and teachers.
You're absolutely correct, in my opinion. And this goes even deeper. I afraid that it is wired in our genes somehow, because there should be a reason why this approach to learning is so popular and it feels intuitive for people from around the world. I suppose it worked in traditional societies and in hunters-gatherers society, in agricultural, and even in initial manufacturing. And that's the place where our culture should evolve. Our genes cannot evolve quickly in years. Even in 100 years is not enough. It needs tens of thousands of years to change something really, really important system. But our culture could evolve much faster. And so from the very early years, we override some natural beliefs of our children by cultural narratives, and that works pretty much good. You could see that in most parts of the world, people become more tolerant to other cultures, more inclusive, because we have the core need to be friendly with others, because this apparently returns the others acting friendly to us. And but we also have that natural wiring to be aggressive to everything that we don't quite understand. And this core need to be friendly creates the cultural structures that takes control over that part that is afraid of everything, and it works that way. So with educational, I'm afraid we also have some patterns that worked perfectly for our ancestors and still working for us perfectly in many, many situations. But unfortunately, if you want to compete with AI, with other people uh, who use AI to augment their performance, you should attach to these new technologies. And new technologies is not only about hardware and software. It is about the new stories, new narratives, new ways we act. The meta skills, right?
Yeah. Well, I just can't help but wonder what's going to happen first is like the singularity is active and AI runs everything, or our genetics change. Because I don't think we have 10,000 years to fix our genetics before AI takes over.
Yeah, we definitely cannot change our genetics right now. We can already genetically fix some diseases that have a really simple cause, like one broken gene, maybe two. And that's all. If the particular problem is built on thousands of genes, scientists are simply unable to identify those genes, not only fix them. And fortunately, that's not important, because AI helps us to over AI and our culture helps us to change things that are wired in a way, that are encoded in our genes in a way that we no longer like. If we want to know, uh, is the singularity a thing that will change the way how we live, then we should accept the uncertainty. We don't know. Singularity is, by definition, is the thing that we don't know. We could predict that it could probably happen there, about 50th year, but all our predictions, what will happen after singularity, is naive by definition. And it is also not guaranteed that singularity is even possible. Maybe our progress will go exponentially, but it will continue feel like it is today. Like the technology is impressive. This tech that we use right now to record this podcast is fantastic. And in 20 years, we will probably have even more fantastic things, but it is not guaranteed that it will replace all our the technology will cover all our needs. Maybe we will be just comfortable with what we have, with the solutions that AI create for us. we won't be scared by that, and our needs will be even greater. So we will need more, and it won't be able to satisfy those needs just physically. I don't know. Plus, that's a philosophical question of why do we still need to work to get the means for living? There is a discussions about that basic income, etc. That's also an interesting topic, and I think that would be an off topic if we will continue there today.
I'm writing it down. So as you've progressed in your career, are you finding a consistent amount of time to learn? Do you have to try harder to set time aside to learn? Or are you spending the majority of your time working and learning is only a small part of, say, what you do over the course of a week?
It works different for different developers, but the most important part that is common for everyone who is very successful, uh, I mean, successful in terms of productivity, and eventually this is also reflected in salaries, is that you learn when you solve the tasks. If you have 10 years of experience, it is not the same as if you have 1 year of experience repeated 10 times. So if at some point you're just making money by repeating the same things again and again, that could be a problem for your career. Maybe you should invent some automation for that. Maybe you should start learning something in background. That's a problem. You could find that it is difficult to switch later to something else where you could grow beneath your glass ceiling. But it is not that simple question. Should you learn out of your work? Because there are apparently lots of things to learn that you won't encounter in your work. The motivation and the training and uh, the ability to remember things on the real tasks is maximum. So if you can do something, if you can learn something by doing your tasks, that's the most productive time in learning. But if you want to learn something ahead, like a technology that you want to include in your resume or meta skills, as I mentioned, then apparently you should learn in background. And in this case, we should take a separate episode on motivation, but the most important question for you will be where to find the time to learn. We could be a wrapper for the real question, where can I get motivation to do that? Because many people code, many web developers code in their free time. At first, it may look that they do not rest that way, but this is not true, because the difference between work when you spend your energy and recover when you regain your energy is deadlines and certain goals. If you have deadlines and you have the goals that are very important to achieve, you are very likely to spend your energy during that process. And even when you switch from that type of coding to the coding when you want to try something new, what is interesting to you, you're actually recovering. And from the outside, it might look that you do the same, you write the code, but you feel, and your body and your brain feel different. So many people code in their free time. It is called a pet project, and this is a healthy practice. But that's not the only way to progress, because many people do not want pet projects. They do not want to code in their free time, but they don't mind to spend some time on learning. So the learning could be structured otherwise. You could watch educational videos like lectures. If it is easy for you, then it would be a wise choice. You could do some exercises, which is coding, of course, but that is structured not as coding, but as a part of something bigger, like your learning process. And yes, and some people stop learning outside of the work just because their work is filled with new experiences every day. And that's also an option. So different ways are possible, and there is no recommendation that none of these ways is perfect in general, is best for everyone. The way that is perfect for you is defined by the situation where you are and by some your natural preferences and maybe talents or habits.
Well, from my point of view, I sort of stumbled into a balance of learning by hosting content because I'm collecting and absorbing and sharing information, but then also the back end producing. There's some learning involved in wanting to be better at it, but a lot of that learning is reactive depending on, say, how much demand increases. So like if I only have 10 hours a week to edit, but I have 20 hours worth of demand, I got to figure out a way to do it faster. So some of that learning comes from necessity. So it's a mixture. But what I really appreciate from what you were saying is the idea that developers and programmers are creating these pet projects. There's no deadline. It's somewhat for the fun of it and the sense of play that can come through in the creative process is part of that restorative element that instills people with a joy and the sense of, oh, I'm doing this for my own satisfaction. I'm doing this because I love it and I have a passion for it. And that sense of playfulness is tantamount to the recovery process as well.
That could be a problem with motivation because many developers say that the highest salaries are in the most boring projects, and the most exciting projects are often assume that they will find lots of enthusiasts who might be experienced, but they also have some free finance, so it is not necessary for them to work, so they could work even for a symbolic, not literally symbolic, but a lower salary. But again, we return to the situation. You could find the perfectly interesting work for you, and there is a difference between that progress by necessity and having the necessity and not doing any progress. So that's again your choice. If you encounter that necessity, will you lower your bar or will you learn to improve your performance?
Well, Pavel, thank you for your expertise and thank you for including me on this project as well. It does mean a lot to me to be able to help collect this information, share it, absorb it, edit it, do whatever it is is my role and my responsibility. So thank you for that. For those of you who want to dig a little bit deeper, you can search for Joseph Iani on LinkedIn. This isn't about me, but if you do have any interest or have any questions about web media, I'm here to help. And you can find Pavel on X, formerly known as Twitter. It is at PAVELKRGN. Rest in peace, Twitter.
Thank you, Joseph. Thanks for everyone for watching.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next episode.